Welcome to the deep dive. We take these really complex stories, unpack them, and try to pull out the insights you need to, well, really understand what's going on.
And today's story is definitely complex. It's quite extraordinary, actually.
It really is. We're doing a deep dive into the journey of Alberto Daniel Hill. Now, you might know that name. He's a pretty prominent cybersecurity expert these days.
Right, but his personal story goes so much deeper. It's shaped by some really profound adversity.
Profound is the word. Including, and this is almost hard to grasp, being the first person in Uruguay ever imprisoned for a computer-related crime.
A crime he absolutely vehemently maintains he did not commit.
Yeah. And that intensely personal saga, that awful experience, it became this, well, unexpected catalyst for something much bigger.
That's what's so fascinating here. We're looking at a real-world case study, you know? It shows how you can leverage digital platforms for really powerful advocacy.
And build trust, right. Which seems so rare online these days.
Exactly. A unique kind of trust. And how you can generate this raw, unfiltered content, the kind that doesn't just sort of inform, but genuinely educates and empowers people.
It sounds like it's about hearing directly from people who've actually lived through these things.
Precisely. It's that direct voice, turning individual injustice into something collective, a force for change. It really shows how a personal crisis can bloom into a global mission.
That arc is just incredible, from isolation to influence. So our mission today is to trace exactly how Alberto Daniel Hill did that.
After all that trauma, personal and professional.
Right. How did he find his voice? How did he build this unique platform using social media, specifically Twitter or X now, and particularly Twitter Spaces, that live audio feature?
He really harnessed those tools, not just to tell his own story, which is harrowing enough.
No, he used them to foster this completely new kind of community engagement. And crucially, those live interactions became the source material, the wellspring for his podcast, Cyber Midnight Club.
That raw, unscripted content is the backbone of the podcast.
It's a story of resilience, definitely. Strategic digital engagement, too. And just the raw power of authentic storytelling. So for you listening, this is like a blueprint.
Yeah, a real-world example, how a personal crisis can really morph into a global mission, showing the potential of these platforms for advocacy, for change.
Okay, so to really get the depth of that transformation, we need to go back. Back before even late 2014, Alberto's early career, the initial traumas, he was already deep in IT and cybersecurity, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah. He had this really significant kind of pioneering role in Uruguay. He was actually the country's very first IT expert assigned to work on a cybercrime case.
The first? Wow, why then?
Well, it was tied to new cybercrime laws being implemented around that time. So it put him right at the very, very early days of digital forensics in Uruguay.
And what did that work actually involve? Because the context there sounds critical.
It's absolutely critical to understanding the depth of what he went through later. Imagine this. He was tasked with sifting through, counting, over 3,000 images. And we're talking profoundly disturbing content, child exploitation material, an unimaginable volume.
Oh my God.
He describes it himself as literally mentally twisting his perception of humanity. It poisoned his worldview, as he put it.
I can't even begin to imagine the psychological toll, the emotional weight of dealing with that day in, day out.
Right. He wasn't just, looking at the dark side of the internet from a distance. He was immersed in it. Trying to help bring justice, yes, but the personal cost was immense.
Just devastating. The kind of thing that leaves permanent scars, you'd think.
It certainly did. And, understandably, this led to severe burnout. By December 2014, he had to step away from that specific line of work for his own mental health.
He had to prioritize himself.
Exactly. But what's really insightful about this period, looking back, is how it laid this complex foundation for him. Resilience, yes, but also this deep vulnerability.
Which would be tested even more later, tragically.
Right. He gained this firsthand, visceral knowledge of the dangers, the psychological costs of that digital underworld. It wasn't academic for him. It was etched into his being.
And then, just a few years later, September 2017 rolls around. Operation Bitcoin.
Yeah, this infamous arrest. He becomes the first person in Uruguay imprisoned for a computer crime. Again, a crime he insists he didn't commit.
And the conditions. 8 months in preventative prison. So traumatic he even fell into a coma.
It's an incomprehensible level of stress, physical and psychological. especially layered on top of that earlier trauma with the disturbing content work. It was just devastating.
And the public side of it, the media.
Oh, the media in Uruguay, according to him, just completely destroyed his image. They didn't just report the arrest. They painted him as, and this is a quote, the worst cyber criminal, cyber terrorist on earth.
So total public vilification, a character assassination.
It was even worse. He says police press releases effectively doxed him.
Doxed him. You mean released his personal info?
His full name, his face, his home address, every detail, just put out there publicly. Overnight, he went from being this respected pioneer in digital forensics to a complete pariah in his own country.
The mental weight of that. Public humiliation on top of the trauma, the imprisonment.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to fathom. Losing your freedom, your reputation, your entire identity in the eyes of your community.
A total dismantling of his life. And when he's finally released, his reputation is in shreds. He's lost millions in cryptocurrency assets because he was locked up.
Assets that could be worth how much now?
He estimates around $10 million with current Bitcoin prices.
Wow, a staggering financial loss, too.
Absolutely. And on top of all that, the traditional media, the ones who'd already basically convicted him publicly, they won't give him a voice.
So how does someone even begin to rebuild from that when every local door seems slammed shut?
And that right there was the turning point for Alberto. When those local avenues are closed, where do you go?
The internet.
Exactly. His most valuable asset, as he puts it, coming out of prison. Literally his cell phone. That device was his immediate link to the outside world.
And soon his link to a global audience.
That was the strategic revelation. He thought, okay, maybe my country of only 3 million people won't listen, or they've already made up their minds.
Right. The media narrative was set.
But, he realized, there are 78 billion people out there who might be willing to listen to my story. That wasn't just a thought. It was a strategic reframing of his entire path forward. It redefined everything.
So the first step towards finding that voice again was social media, Twitter.
Yeah.
What did that look like initially?
Well, at first it was raw, completely unfiltered outpouring. He used it to express, as he said, all those feelings of hate and anger.
Understandable given the trauma.
Totally understandable. Anger at the system, the injustice, the people involved. He was grappling with really strong negative emotions, anger, hate, even, a desire for revenge.
Which must have felt like a necessary release valve.
It was. A vital coping mechanism, a way to let out the immense pressure of being vilified and silenced. But he was also aware, even then, that those feelings, while natural, weren't going to help him really recover or move forward constructively.
That takes incredible self-awareness in that situation.
It does. He noted the struggle lasted for years, slowly fading. The process of accepting what happened, learning the hard lessons, moving on without dwelling, but still using the experience, that wasn't easy. It took a long time.
When did things really start to shift internally?
Probably not until early 2022, when his legal case finally closed. That allowed him to genuinely process and accept the losses, financial and personal, without that constant internal pain. Remember, he'd tried reaching out to top journalists, TV shows in Uruguay.
But they wouldn't touch his story, even if they found it compelling.
Exactly. None ever followed through. He was effectively silenced by traditional media. So all he had was his phone and Twitter's global reach.
That forced transition from raw emotion to strategic advocacy, that's incredible growth.
It really is. Realizing the digital world offered boundless possibility when his local world shut him out.
A powerful shift. From desperate outlet to calculated strategy for global reach, vindication, impact. Which brings us to the next phase. He didn't just stick with tweets, right? He went live. How did Cyber Midnight Club, the podcast's precursor, actually start?
Well, what's really amazing here is how organic it was. It wasn't some big planned media launch.
No slick strategy document?
Not at all. It started almost by accident. Alberto kicked off an initial test space on Twitter, and the topic was seemingly pretty standard romance scams.
A common online danger, yeah.
He later admitted he actually intended it to be kind of sarcastic, ironic even. A cynical take, maybe?
Okay, but that's not what happened.
Not at all. What happened next was completely unexpected, transformative, an unplanned convergence, he calls it. Victims, former criminals, experts in different fields, they just started joining the space.
Who showed up based on that one topic?
Just showed up. And the conversation deepened, like immediately. It pivoted from potential sarcasm to this really serious, profoundly empathetic discussion, organic depth, raw candor.
And that revealed something.
It revealed this huge, unmet appetite for raw, direct, unscripted conversations about these sensitive, often taboo topics.
Yeah.
And the environment for that, it was fostered largely by Alberto's own approach.
Which you called radical transparency. That sounds brave, maybe even risky, given his history. What did that actually mean for him?
No, it's definitely brave and risky. And for him, it's not just a buzzword. It's a deliberate, tactical core of his whole approach. He's willing to share intensely personal details, past mistakes, his own experiences being hacked.
Like what?
He'd openly say things like, I've been hacked.
Yeah.
Okay, I've even hacked myself out of curiosity once, infecting myself with a RIT.
A remote access Trojan. He admits infecting himself. Publicly.
Openly. But it's not for shock value. His motivation is clear. He says, I share a lot of things about me, my life. I do it for a purpose. I want people to actually believe and show that I am genuine.
That kind of candor must be disarming.
It immediately disarms skepticism. And crucially, it invites others to be just as open. It creates that safe space for vulnerable sharing, which is essential for the community he was building.
And he combines it with humility.
Yeah, profound humility. He'd say things like, whoever claims he's an expert, he can never be hacked. My respects, but I'm not that kind of person.
That's actually refreshing, an expert admitting they're not infallible, especially in cybersecurity.
It really is. That honesty, coming from someone wrongly labeled a master cybercriminal, it builds trust with an audience that has every reason to be skeptical. He openly admits he worked incredibly hard to protect businesses and consumers from that type of attacker that I used to be.
He points to a real transformation.
A genuine, profound transformation. And interestingly, he says the realization about the damage he'd done, it didn't happen when he was caught. It was not until I started to turn my life around and started to interact with victims that I started to understand the damage that I had done.
So talking directly to victors was the key. That was his epiphany.
Exactly. That direct interaction fundamentally changed his understanding of the real-world impact. It fuels his motivation for this radical transparency now and his advocacy for victims.
He believes conventional awareness campaigns aren't enough.
He thinks they often fall short because, as he puts it, criminals are better at committing crime than the common person on the street is at protecting themselves against that crime.
That's a sobering thought.
It is. And his most urgent plea, coming straight from his own past and transformation, it's for victims to report.
Why so insistent on reporting?
He says powerfully that not reporting or not calling the police on me resulted in me keeping on going because what consequences did I have? None. That's a brutal lesson from his own past.
Wow.
So he actively works against the shame, the victim blaming that stops people reporting. He points out only a tiny fraction, maybe 7% to 14%, actually report cybercrimes.
And that silence just helps the criminals.
It emboldens them, lets them continue unchecked. So by providing this platform for raw stories, he's fighting that silence, encouraging this collective proactive stance.
So it's a calculated risk, this openness, but for a much bigger purpose. Does it extend beyond cybersecurity topics into his personal life too?
Yes, absolutely. He explicitly calls it a calculated risk. He says, I play, but okay. Always controlling and, first of all, understanding what the risk I'm exposed to and accepting that or not.
And this applies personally.
Very much so. Most notably, meeting his fiancée online. She showed incredible trust, actually traveling to meet him without initially telling her family.
Wow. Given his public profile and past, that's remarkable trust.
It highlights the level of faith his authenticity can inspire. When she did tell her family, their initial shock just underscored the real-world challenges his past created. But her willingness to take that risk for him, it speaks volumes about the credibility he built online.
That personal commitment to trust and safety must resonate.
It does. His anxiety about her safety, making sure she shared his details with her family, it shows it's not just theory for him, it's lived experience. So this vulnerability, plus his expertise, creates this unique, trustworthy environment in his spaces.
And the calculated risk extends professionally too, sharing old black hat techniques.
Yes. He knows it's a fine line. Sharing a technique he once used could potentially be misused.
That seems dangerous. How does he justify that?
He calculates that demonstrating his deep first-hand knowledge of how criminals actually operate builds far more credibility with victims and experts than some sanitized academic approach ever could.
So leveraging the uncomfortable parts of his past to prevent future harm.
Exactly. He makes it clear. Understanding how criminals think and operate is the first, most crucial step in effective defense.
Okay, so this personal vulnerability becomes the bedrock for these public discussions, fostering trust. And that leads directly to how these live Twitter spaces feed his podcast, Cyber Midnight Club.
Right. And this is where it gets really unique. This isn't some polished documentary pulling from carefully curated sources.
No, the podcast content comes directly from those raw, live, unscripted conversations happening in the spaces.
Exactly. So what does that mean for you, the listener? What's the core value here?
It's authenticity, right?
Yeah.
Direct insight you just can't get elsewhere.
Absolutely. You're getting unfiltered, often spontaneous exchanges from people who've genuinely been there, not just observers or academics reporting from a distance.
Real, lived experience, unfiltered. That's the differentiator.
Precisely. You're hearing the voices of victims who suffered betrayal, reformed perpetrators who used deception as a weapon, proactive advocates fighting these threats now.
Real-time, real-stakes conversations.
Unrehearsed revelations. That immediacy captures nuances, emotional truths that just get lost in more structured, post-produced formats. It's like being a fly on the wall during these pivotal, candid moments. You absorb the raw human element behind the tech issues.
So focusing on the podcast itself, Cyber Midnight Club, how is it actually doing? What are the stats? Where can people find it?
Sure, so Cyber Midnight Club launched back in December 2018. And it's incredibly active. It's updated daily.
Daily. An hour-long podcast daily. That's intense.
It really is. As of July 8th, 2025, he has 522 episodes, average length, about an hour, like you said.
And the reach. How many people are listening?
It's got over 100,000 plays across all platforms combined.
Yeah.
And specifically on Spotify, it's hit 12,000 plays.
Okay. What about ratings? Any feedback?
Well, on Apple Podcasts, it has a 1.8 rating from just 5 reviews, which might not sound great on the surface. But one reviewer really nailed its strength, saying the content offers authentic narratives, presenting a perspective that captivates listeners with its genuine and unscripted feel.
That captures the essence you were describing. Where can people find it?
It's widely distributed. Twitter, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Facebook, Instagram, Medium, IMDb, even Telegram. It's really positioned as this daily true crime podcast by Alberto Daniel Hill, offering those firsthand insights into the dark web and expert analysis of current cybersecurity issues.
The dedication to produce that daily, especially drawing from live, unpredictable spaces, is pretty remarkable.
It truly is.
Can you give us some specific examples? What kinds of raw conversations from the spaces have made it into Cyber Midnight Club episodes to really illustrate the breadth and the unique, sometimes unsettling perspectives?
Definitely. Because it's fueled by the spaces, the podcast covers this huge range of urgent, complex, often uncomfortable topics, straight from those involved. For instance, there's a chilling episode titled, Cartel Surveillance FBI Informed Governments Targeted in Mexico City.
That sounds terrifying.
It is. The space discussed chilling allegations of how the Sinaloa cartel, maybe through compromised officials, exploited Mexico City's surveillance cameras.
Used public cameras. For what?
To track and brutally target FBI informants, allegedly. It's a terrifying example of sophisticated criminal groups repurposing public infrastructure for violence. It just shatters trust in public safety systems.
And it doesn't stop there.
No, other discussions explored cartels potentially developing their own advanced private cellular networks, which is alarming criminal innovation in infrastructure, allowing them even more impunity.
Truly disturbing. What about things that hit closer to home for many listeners, like digital deception and scams?
That's another huge focus. An episode like Decoding Digital Deceptions, Scams, Cybersecurity, and Safeguards goes deep into the psychology and tech behind online scams.
Not just the tech, but how trust is exploited.
Exactly. How fundamental human trust is systematically broken down. They talk about evolving tactics, like the scary use of AI deepfakes to create totally convincing fake identities or scenarios.
The deepfakes are genuinely frightening territory.
They are. And this ties right back to the romance scams topic that started his spaces. Guests like Anna Rowe, who went from victim to advocate, and Brett Johnson, a reformed ex-cybercriminal. They give unfiltered insights.
Into the criminal mindset.
Yes, and the step-by-step psychological manipulation. They make it clear how hard it is for anyone to spot these elaborate deceptions when skilled con artists use these tools.
You also mentioned historical context, like the Hackers, Freaks, and the Hunt for Par episode, tracing cybercrime's roots.
Right, from early phone freaking up to today's global mess. It gives valuable context, shows how foundations for current threats were laid long ago. Many techniques have surprising historical roots.
And given Alberto's own history with the justice system, I bet those legal aspects feature heavily.
Oh, absolutely. And with real personal weight. There's an episode, Reflections on Hacking, Justice, and Cybersecurity in Latin America. It discusses the arrest and ongoing detention of his associate Vladi in Uruguay. Alleged hacktivism website defacements of government sites. The space explored the legal maze, perceived injustices, issues with confidentiality of legal files, questions about digital evidence, and disproportionate charges.
And this highlighted a bigger problem.
Crucially, yes. It starkly showed the lack of cybersecurity expertise within Latin American legal systems, a systemic flaw Alberto constantly hammers on, using his own case as Exhibit A.
Like in the injustice of responsible disclosure, where his ethical hacking got him jailed.
Exactly. His ethical disclosure was tragically misunderstood by law enforcement because they didn't grasp the tech. It's a critical gap between technology and the law, a recurring theme.
It sounds like these spaces really get into the weeds, bringing in perspectives you don't normally hear, or maybe perspectives that are intentionally obscured sometimes.
They absolutely don't shy away. Take the explosive episode Fianca in Dispositivos, or Revelations, Vulnerabilities of Trust in Mobile Devices.
What was explosive about it?
It features Jonathan Scott, a mobile security engineer, ex-law enforcement contractor. He claims he found a grave, persistent vulnerabilities in both Apple and Android OS.
Vulnerabilities allowing what?
Stealthy, nearly undetectable data extraction. He talked about creating tools for companies like Verizon that could bypass phone security.
And he implied collusion between governments and corporations.
He implies possible collusion to exploit these flaws. And get this, he suggests his findings make Pegasus.
The infamous zero-click spyware.
Yes, the one used against journalists, activists. He claims his findings make Pegasus look like a child's play or a mere toy by comparison.
That's an enormous claim, making Pegasus look like a toy. What does zero-click mean for listeners again?
It means the spyware can infect a phone without the user doing anything. No clicking a bad link, no opening a file. It's a silent, invisible attack giving total control. That's why it's so terrifying.
And Scott's claim suggests something even worse exists.
Something potentially even more sophisticated, stealthy, maybe bypassing current detection on a massive scale. This is the kind of chilling first-hand account you get directly from these unscripted spaces. It challenges everything.
Truly chilling, thinking our own devices could be compromised like that. What about activism? Anonymous gets mentioned a lot. Do they explore that?
Very deeply. There's a space titled Twitter Space with Spiderbite clarifying things about hashtag Anonymous and kind of AMA. It gets into nuanced discussions about activism, Anonymous's fluid structure, the real threats they face, infiltration by state actors, doxing.
What are their goals, according to these discussions?
Exposing corruption is primary. They also discuss how non-activists can participate, broadening the definition to include just sharing knowledge and support. And they get technical.
Technical how?
Talking about how government ministries can still be vulnerable to the things like SQL injection.
SQL injection, that feels like an old vulnerability.
It is old, but still potent, because systems haven't been updated, or code has overlooked flaws. SQL injection lets attackers slip malicious code into database queries to access or delete data. Its persistence shows how hard cybersecurity maintenance is.
And the darker side.
Yeah, the conversation touched on things like hitman services selling stolen identities on the dark web, described by a former black hat who joined. It's an unsettling glimpse into that underworld.
It sounds like they cover a huge range. What about national surveillance or infrastructure issues?
Definitely. An episode on Uruguay's digital surveillance landscape discusses a cybersecurity decree, but also scrutinizes El Guardian, a secretive surveillance system raising privacy alarms.
And elsewhere.
Another, Mexico's surveillance law, highlights a new spy law giving broad access to personal data, raising abuse concerns, especially after their Pegasus scandal.
That balance between security and privacy is always fraught.
Always. And then there's update on Europe's largest energy outage Twitter space, speculating about a massive Spanish power outage. Was it a cyber attack? Official explanations versus other possibilities. It highlights critical infrastructure vulnerability.
So these raw, unscripted conversations offer perspectives hidden from public view.
Exactly. And Alberto's hosting style, his personal journey, the open, non-judgmental forum is crucial. It fosters that candor, that courageous sharing. That's why the podcast content is so rich, impactful, and fundamentally different.
It sounds like more than just sharing information. It's like building a collective defense, a community. What's the ripple effect been beyond the specific topics?
That's the key question, isn't it? What happens when one person shares their story of injustice? For Alberto, it's led to shifts far beyond his initial reach. Those spaces, that convergence of victims, criminals, experts.
That mix sounds incredibly powerful for generating insights.
It is. The collective sharing leads to profound insights, and ultimately, this unique form of collective defense. It's that safe space where people share experiences Without fear, figure out protection together.
Like crowdsourcing safety tips in real time.
Sort of, yeah. Listeners share scam attempts, others identify red flags, maybe build a collective checklist. Former criminals advise on attack patterns. The community amplifies the individual story, turning trauma into a shared shield through mutual support and knowledge.
So his personal story, amplified digitally by this community, ignited a ripple effect.
Exactly. It gained unexpected global reach. He talks about connecting with a major figure in Germany via Twitter, which got his story broadcast worldwide. It just shows the power of these platforms to transcend borders, amplify voices traditional media might ignore.
But the most incredible ripple effect, advising the Uruguayan Congress.
Right. From prisoner to advisor to the very system that wronged him. That's an astonishing turnaround. Almost unbelievable.
How did that even happen?
He uses his own case, his ordeal, as a living example of the flaws in their legal and judicial system. His persistent advocacy, using his platform, made it undeniable. He says the change was basically triggered by your case, from target to consultant.
That's just, wow, all fun.
What specific tangible changes resulted from this advocacy in Uruguay's cyber infrastructure?
Significant ones, right at the top. He recounts former directors of cybersecurity at Interpol, the Uruguayan CERT, even the head of security for the presidency removed or replaced.
That's a massive shakeup at the highest levels, not just minor tweaks.
A huge structural shift. There's now a completely new structure, a dedicated cybersecurity unit with trained professionals. And critically, a cybercrime prosecutor who knows Alberto's case well has been appointed.
How did he manage that persistence?
Persistence, yes. Testimonies to Congress, public advocacy via the spaces, presenting real-world case studies from the podcast highlighting systemic failures. The evidence became undeniable, creating an impetus for change despite any initial resistance.
It shows a real institutional response, a systemic response to the issues he exposed. It underscores his belief in digital platforms as tools for voice, amplification, societal change, and his core message, echoing through it all.
Share your story.
Share your story because, as painful as it is, it could save just one person. The reward is not for you when you speak out, but it's for others who might be vulnerable.
And combating the shame that keeps victims silent.
Exactly. Highlighting that tiny percentage, 7–14%, who report. That silence emboldens criminals, lets the cycle continue. By providing this platform for raw stories, he's fighting the silence, breaking the stigma, encouraging that collective, proactive stance.
It's a powerful model for turning personal pain into public protection.
Truly effective.
Alberto Daniel Hill's story is just extraordinary. A real testament to resilience and, yeah, the transformative power of digital platforms when used for genuine connection, for advocacy.
His personal log into hell, as you put it, those dark times. It really did become a log out to hope for many.
And his experiences are now actively shaping a more just, more secure digital future in Uruguay. His voice inspiring others globally to find theirs, share truths, join that collective defense.
And connecting it to the bigger picture, it really makes you think, doesn't it? What does it truly mean to know someone or even trust information in this digital age?
Especially with so much mediation, so much deception out there.
How do we sift through the noise to find authenticity? And crucially, how will our collective courage, our willingness to share our own vulnerabilities, our experiences, and really listen to authentic voices on these platforms, how will that shape online interaction moving forward?
Particularly as tech keeps blurring lines between truth and, well, everything else.
That's a profound thought for you to take away as you navigate this complex, interconnected digital world we all live in now.